Commander Zexai had lived for 3 centuries without knowing fear. As a Vorthack warrior, he had conquered 17 star systems, reduced entire civilizations to ash, and earned the title Death Shadow among his people. His chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles, each mark a testament to his survival where others had fallen. Fear was an alien concept to his species, a weakness that had been bred out of their genetic code millennia ago. The Vorthack Empire stretched across half the galaxy, built on the principle that might made right. They were apex predators, standing 8 feet tall with razor-sharp claws and mandibles that could crush durasteel. Their ships were fortresses of destruction, their armies unstoppable waves of calculated violence. Zexai commanded the 47th Annihilation Fleet, responsible for the systematic conquest of the Outer Rim territories. It was supposed to be routine. Intelligence reports described the Sol system as containing a primitive species barely capable of interstellar travel. The humans, as they called themselves, had only recently achieved faster-than-light communication and possessed what appeared to be laughably basic defensive capabilities. Their ships were small, their weapons crude, their military organization chaotic by Vorthack standards. Zexai's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system with characteristic Vorthack precision. 250 warships arranged in perfect formation, each one a kilometer-long instrument of annihilation. The humans had detected them immediately. Their sensor technology was surprisingly sophisticated, but Zexai expected nothing more than a token resistance before inevitable surrender. The human response surprised him. Instead of cowering or attempting futile negotiations, they launched everything they had. Their fleet was pathetically small by comparison, perhaps 60 ships of various sizes, but they came straight at the Vorthack formation without hesitation. It was tactically absurd, strategically hopeless, and yet something about their approach made Zexai's secondary heart skip a beat. The first engagement lasted 14 minutes. Vorthack plasma cannons tore through human shields like tissue paper, their molecular disruptors reducing entire ships to component atoms. But the humans didn't break. Even as their vessels exploded around them, the survivors pressed their attack with a ferocity that bordered on madness. They rammed damaged ships into Vorthack cruisers, detonated their own reactors at point-blank range, and coordinated suicidal tactics that should have been impossible to execute under such overwhelming firepower. Most disturbing of all were the transmissions. Vorthack intelligence had been monitoring human communications for weeks, learning their languages and cultural patterns. During the battle, Zexai listened to the chatter between human pilots and crews. There was no panic, no desperation in their voices. Instead, he heard something that chilled his blood. Determination mixed with what could only be described as joy. Bravo 6, I've got 3 bugs on my tail. Copy that, Sarah. Coming in hot on your starboard. This is Admiral Chun to all ships. Remember what we're fighting for. Make every shot count. Contact. Contact. I've got a beautiful shot on their command ship. The humans were actually enjoying themselves. They were outnumbered 4-1, outgunned by orders of magnitude, facing certain death, and they were having fun. Zexai found this incomprehensible. In 3 centuries of warfare, he had seen species fight desperately for survival. Others surrender immediately to preserve their lives. But he had never witnessed beings who embraced combat with such enthusiasm while facing impossible odds. The human fleet was destroyed, of course. Only 17 of their ships survived the initial engagement, and those retreated toward their inner system in apparent defeat. Zexai's losses were minimal. 8 ships damaged, none destroyed, casualties in the low hundreds. By any military standard, it had been a complete Vorthack victory. Yet something nagged at him as his fleet advanced toward the 3rd planet the humans called Earth. The tactical displays showed the humans had used their brief engagement to gather detailed scans of Vorthack ships, weapons, and shield frequencies. Their retreat hadn't been random panic, but a calculated withdrawal designed to maximize intelligence gathering. These primitives had sacrificed 43 ships, not in a hopeless last stand, but as a reconnaissance in force. The second surprise came when his fleet reached Earth's orbital space. The humans had spent their time well. What should have been a few hastily constructed orbital platforms had somehow become a maze of defensive installations, minefields, and weapon emplacements that stretched from the planet's surface to beyond its moon. The logistics of such rapid construction should have been impossible, yet the evidence floated before his sensors. More disturbing were the modifications to their ships. The 17 survivors of the first engagement had been refitted with hybrid technology that incorporated captured Vorthack components. Somehow, in the span of just 6 hours, human engineers had reverse-engineered alien technology that had taken the Vorthack centuries to perfect. Their shields now operated on modified Vorthack frequencies. Their weapons fired plasma bolts that looked suspiciously similar to Vorthack designs, and their tactics had adapted to exploit weaknesses in Vorthack formation fighting that even seasoned Vorthack commanders often overlooked. The siege of Earth lasted 47 days. What should have been a simple orbital bombardment followed by ground invasion became a grinding war of attrition that cost Zexai nearly half his fleet. The humans fought with a creativity that defied military doctrine. They used their planet's gravity well as a weapon, redirecting asteroids into Vorthack formations. They turned their own destroyed ships into improvised missiles, guided by crews who volunteered for suicide missions with the same enthusiasm others might show for a festival. Most unervingly, they adapted faster than should have been possible. Each Vorthack tactic worked exactly once before the humans developed countermeasures. Their ships began appearing with armor configurations that shouldn't have been mathematically stable, weapons that fired in patterns designed specifically to overwhelm Vorthack defensive algorithms, and coordination protocols that turned their smaller numbers into an advantage rather than a liability. Zexai found himself studying human psychology, trying to understand what drove them. Captured personnel were subjected to standard interrogation techniques, but they provided information freely, almost eagerly. They spoke of their families, their hopes for the future, their determination to protect their world. What chilled Zexai was that they showed no fear of death. They feared failure, feared letting down their comrades, feared the destruction of their civilization. But the personal oblivion that terrified most sentient species seemed almost irrelevant to them. "You don't understand," one captured human pilot told him during an interrogation session. "We've been preparing for this our whole history. Every war we've ever fought, every disaster we've survived, every time we've stood up to bullies, it's all led to this moment. You're not just fighting Earth. You're fighting 10,000 years of human stubbornness." The pilot was a young female, barely out of adolescence by human standards, yet she spoke with the confidence of a veteran commander. Her small frame and delicate features were deceiving. Zexai had watched recordings of her ship's final battle, where she had single-handedly destroyed a Vorthack destroyer by flying directly into its main reactor core. She had ejected at the last possible second and somehow survived, only to be captured while attempting to reach the wreckage to recover useful technology. "Fear is a tool," she continued, seemingly oblivious to the translation devices that would carry her words to Vorthack High Command. "You use it to control others, to make them surrender before they even try to fight. But fear only works when you have something left to lose. We already decided we'd rather die free than live as slaves. Once you make that choice, fear becomes irrelevant." Zexai dismissed her words as the bravado of youth, but they haunted him through the following weeks of battle. The humans kept proving their point. When their orbital platforms were destroyed, they fought from their moon. When the moon's bases were overrun, they fought from asteroid bases. When those were eliminated, they fought from ships hidden in their system's outer planets. Each defeat only seemed to make them more determined, more creative, more dangerous. The breakthrough came on the 39th day of the siege. Human engineers had been working around the clock to develop new weapons based on captured Vorthack technology. Their latest creation was something they called a quantum torpedo, a missile that existed in a state of quantum superposition until the moment of impact, making it impossible to target with conventional defenses. The first quantum torpedo test run vaporized 3 Vorthack heavy cruisers in a single shot. The second eliminated an entire squadron. By the time Zexai's fleet had adapted their shields to compensate, the humans had already moved on to their next innovation. Ships that could phase in and out of normal space, striking without warning and disappearing before retaliation was possible. It was during one of these phase attacks that Zexai first felt something he would later recognize as fear. His flagship, the Inevitable Victory, was struck by 17 phase ships operating in perfect coordination. They materialized simultaneously at different points around his vessel, fired concentrated bursts that overloaded specific shield segments, then vanished before his weapons could lock on. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds, but left his ship crippled and drifting. As damage control teams struggled to restore main power, Zexai found himself in the unusual position of being vulnerable. For the first time in his 3-century career, he was not the predator but the prey. The sensation was deeply unsettling. His species had evolved to be apex hunters, their psychology built around the assumption of dominance. The possibility of being hunted by prey was so alien that his mind struggled to process it. The humans could have finished him then. Their phase ships could have returned to deliver a killing blow while his defenses were down. Instead, they transmitted a message directly to his personal communication channel, a feat that should have been impossible given their primitive technology and his ship's security protocols. Commander Zexai, the voice was calm, professional, tinged with what sounded like genuine respect. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Force. We've been monitoring your tactics throughout this engagement. You're a skilled opponent, and we respect your abilities. We're prepared to offer terms for the withdrawal of your fleet. Terms. The humans were offering him terms. Not begging for mercy, not desperately negotiating for their survival, but offering him a way to retreat with honor. The audacity was breathtaking. They were still vastly outnumbered, their planet under siege, their fleets scattered, yet they spoke as though they held the superior position. Your terms, Zexai found himself saying, his voice carrying across the communication channel before his conscious mind could stop it. Complete withdrawal of all Vorthack forces from the Sol system, Admiral Chun replied without hesitation. In exchange, we'll provide you with detailed technical specifications for our quantum torpedo technology and phase drive systems. Consider it a gift between warriors. A gift. They were offering him advanced technology as a gesture of goodwill, technology that would revolutionize Vorthack warfare and give his empire significant advantages in future conflicts. It was the kind of offer that should have been impossible to refuse, yet something about it felt wrong. Accepting would mean admitting that the humans were his equals, that a species barely capable of interstellar travel had fought the mighty Vorthack Empire to a standstill. Why? He asked, genuinely curious. You could continue fighting. You've proven surprisingly resourceful. Why offer terms now? Because this is just the beginning, Chin replied, and for the first time, Zexai heard something in her voice that made his blood run cold. You've seen what we can do when we're fighting for our survival. Imagine what we'll be capable of when we're fighting for revenge. The communication ended, leaving Zexai alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that something fundamental had changed. The humans weren't just another species to be conquered and absorbed into the Vorthack Empire. They were something else entirely, a force that grew stronger under pressure, more dangerous when cornered, more innovative when faced with impossible odds. For the first time in his 3 centuries of existence, Zexai understood that there were beings in the universe who might be more dangerous than his own species. The thought terrified him in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. Fear, he was beginning to learn, was not the weakness his people had believed it to be. It was a warning system, an evolutionary response that told him when he was facing something that could destroy him. The humans had given him that warning. Now, he had to decide whether he was wise enough to heed it. The decision to reject the human terms came from the Vorthak High Command, not from Zexai himself. When he transmitted Admiral Chen's offer to the Imperial Council, their response was swift and predictable. The Empire did not negotiate with primitives. The very suggestion that humans could dictate terms to the mighty Vorthak was seen as an insult worthy of total annihilation. Zexai received his new orders with growing unease. He was to continue the siege until Earth's complete surrender, then proceed with standard conquest protocols, elimination of all military personnel, enslavement of useful populations, and the systematic destruction of human culture. The quantum torpedo and phase drive technologies were to be captured intact for Imperial use, but no credit would be given to their creators. The humans seemed to have anticipated this response. Within hours of the Empire's rejection of their terms, their entire tactical approach changed. Where they had previously fought defensively, seeking to minimize casualties while wearing down Vorthak forces, they now switched to an aggressive strategy that prioritized maximum damage over self-preservation. The change was immediately apparent. Human ships began appearing throughout the Sol system in coordinated strikes against Vorthak supply lines, communication arrays, and isolated squadrons. They had somehow multiplied their effective fleet strength through rapid construction techniques that defied everything Zexai understood about manufacturing logistics. More disturbing still, their new ships incorporated technologies that hadn't existed during the first engagement. The humans had developed something they called adaptive armor, hull plating that could reconfigure itself in real time to optimize defense against specific weapon types. Vorthak plasma cannons, which had previously cut through human ships like energy through vacuum, now struggled to penetrate hulls that seemed to strengthen themselves with each impact. When Vorthak forces switched to kinetic weapons, the armor adapted again, becoming flexible enough to absorb and redirect kinetic energy. Even more troubling was their development of what human communications referred to as neural networking. Individual human ships began operating with perfect coordination, as though controlled by a single mind. They anticipated each other's movements, covered weaknesses automatically, and executed complex maneuvers that required split-second timing across dozens of vessels simultaneously. When Zexai's tactical officers analyzed the patterns, they concluded that such coordination should have required quantum-entangled communication systems far beyond human technological capabilities. The siege entered its second month with Zexai's fleet trapped in an increasingly sophisticated web of human defenses. What had begun as a simple conquest had become a war of attrition that favored the defenders. Human ships struck from multiple directions simultaneously, their phase drives allowing them to appear anywhere within the system without warning. They had learned to use the Sol system's gravity wells, radiation fields, and asteroid belts as force multipliers, turning the local space into a maze of hazards that benefited their smaller, more maneuverable vessels. Zexai found himself studying human tactical doctrine with reluctant admiration. Traditional Vorthak warfare relied on overwhelming force applied systematically until enemy resistance collapsed. It was efficient, predictable, and had proven successful against every species they had encountered. The humans fought differently. They treated warfare as a creative exercise, constantly innovating and adapting in ways that kept their opponents off balance. More unsettling was their approach to casualties. Vorthak forces fought with calculated aggression, each warrior understanding their value to the Empire and fighting to preserve themselves for future battles. Human pilots and crews seemed to view their own lives as resources to be expended for maximum strategic advantage. They volunteered for suicide missions with enthusiasm, turned damaged ships into guided missiles, and coordinated attacks that guaranteed their own destruction but crippled enemy vessels worth 100 times their individual value. It's not that they don't value their lives, Zexai's intelligence officer explained during a strategy session. Our analysis of capture communications shows they care deeply about their individual survival. But They've somehow calculated that their collective survival depends on each individual being willing to sacrifice themselves for the group. It's a paradox that makes their behavior impossible to predict. The paradox became clearer when HFY began studying human history. His xenology specialists had compiled detailed reports on human civilization, drawn from captured databases and intercepted transmissions. What they found was a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history fighting impossible odds. Humans had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, volcanic catastrophes, and countless wars that should have driven them to extinction. Each crisis had only made them more resilient, more innovative, more determined to survive. Their military history was particularly revealing. Humans had a documented tradition of small forces defeating vastly superior opponents through tactics, determination, and what they called thinking outside the box. They celebrated military leaders who had won battles through unconventional means, honored soldiers who had held impossible positions against overwhelming odds, and taught their children stories of heroic last stands that turned defeat into moral victory. The concept of moral victory was particularly alien to Vorthack understanding. In their culture, victory was measured in concrete terms: territory conquered, enemies destroyed, resources acquired. The idea that a military defeat could somehow constitute a victory simply because it demonstrated courage or principle was incomprehensible. Yet human history was filled with examples of forces that had been destroyed, but whose sacrifice inspired their people to eventual triumph. As the siege dragged into its third month, HFY began to understand that he was not just fighting a military campaign, but a war of ideologies. The Vorthack Empire represented order, hierarchy, and the triumph of strength over weakness. Humanity represented something chaotic and unpredictable. The idea that determination and ingenuity could overcome any obstacle, that individuals fighting for principles they believed in were stronger than armies fighting for conquest. The turning point came during what human communications called Operation Prometheus. HFY's fleet had finally cornered the remaining human naval forces near Jupiter, intending to eliminate them once and for all before proceeding to Earth's final conquest. Intelligence suggested the humans had only 37 operational ships remaining, their manufacturing capabilities finally exhausted by months of constant warfare. The battle began according to standard Vorthack doctrine. 200 remaining ships arranged in perfect formation, advanced scouts eliminating human sensor platforms, main fleet moving in for the killing blow. The humans responded predictably, gathering their ships into a defensive formation around Jupiter's largest moon and preparing for their final stand. What happened next would haunt HFY's dreams for the rest of his life. The 37 human ships suddenly multiplied, not through reinforcements or hidden reserves, but through what appeared to be technological magic. Each ship split into multiple versions of itself, creating a fleet of over 300 vessels in a matter of minutes. The effect was achieved through a combination of holographic projections, drone technology, and something the humans called quantum multiplication, a technique that allowed a single ship to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. HFY's fleet found itself engaging targets that shouldn't have existed, weapons that fired from impossible angles, and ships that seemed to phase in and out of reality at will. The humans had turned quantum physics into a weapon, using the fundamental uncertainty of reality itself as a tool of war. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened when the quantum multiplication field finally collapsed. Every human ship, every crew member, every piece of technology vanished simultaneously. Not destroyed, not retreated, simply gone, as though they had never existed. HFY's sensors showed empty space where moments before there had been the largest space battle in the system's history. His fleet hung motionless in the vacuum, weapons trained on nothing, victory achieved against an enemy that was no longer there. The communications came from Earth. Admiral Chen's voice, calm and professional as always, reached every ship in the Vorthack fleet simultaneously despite their encrypted channels and security protocols. Commander Zexhai, this is Admiral Chun. I hope you enjoyed our demonstration. What you just witnessed was our latest innovation, quantum displacement technology. We can now move our entire fleet anywhere in the galaxy instantaneously. Your siege of Earth is over. The tactical displays lit up as human ships materialized throughout the Sol system. Not the 37 vessels that had supposedly been destroyed, but over 1,000 ships of various sizes, all incorporating technologies that shouldn't have been possible. They had used the months of siege not just to develop new weapons and defenses, but to build an entirely new fleet using manufacturing techniques that exceeded Vorthack capabilities. We're giving you one final chance to withdraw, Chen continued. Not because we can't defeat your fleet. We've proven we can destroy you whenever we choose. We're offering terms because we believe in giving honorable opponents the opportunity to leave with their dignity intact. Zexhai stared at his tactical displays in growing horror. The humans had played the entire siege as a delaying action, buying time to develop technologies and build forces that made his own fleet obsolete. They had fought desperately not because they were losing, but because they needed him to believe he was winning. Every human ship destroyed, every defensive position overrun, every apparent victory had been carefully orchestrated to keep his attention focused on the immediate battle, while their real preparations proceeded in secret. For 3 centuries, Zexhai had been a predator among prey. Now he understood that he had encountered another predator, one that was patient enough to appear weak until the moment came to reveal its true strength. The feeling that washed over him was unlike anything in his previous experience. His hands shook as he reached for the communication controls, his secondary hearts racing with a rhythm his species had forgotten over millennia of evolutionary dominance. Fear. He was feeling fear, not the rational concern of a military commander facing superior forces, but the primal terror of a hunter realizing it had become the hunted. Every instinct bred into his species over millions of years was screaming warnings his conscious mind could barely process. The humans weren't just more advanced than initial intelligence had suggested. They were more dangerous than anything the Vorthack Empire had ever encountered. They had turned their apparent weakness into strength, their desperation into determination, their defeat into victory. They fought not just with weapons and technology, but with concepts that seemed to warp reality itself around their will to survive. They had made themselves into something that could not be conquered because they refused to accept the possibility of defeat. As Zexhai opened communication channels to begin negotiations for his fleet's withdrawal, he realized that the galaxy had changed forever. The Vorthack Empire had built its power on the assumption that strength would always triumph over weakness, that order would always defeat chaos, that predators would always dominate prey. The humans had proven all of those assumptions wrong. The withdrawal from Sol took 3 days to negotiate and another week to execute. Admiral Chun insisted on personally escorting Zexhai's fleet to the edge of the system, her ship maintaining formation alongside his flagship in what she called a gesture of mutual respect between professional warriors. The experience was unlike anything in Zexhai's military career. Human ships flanked the retreating Vorthack fleet on all sides, their weapons powered down, but clearly ready for instant activation. More unsettling than their obvious technological superiority was their behavior. Human crews transmitted casual greetings to Vorthack ships, shared tactical analyses of the previous battles, and even offered technical assistance when some of Zexhai's damaged vessels experienced systems failures during the withdrawal. "Your engineers are quite skilled," Admiral Chen commented during one of their daily communication sessions. "We've been analyzing the efficiency ratios of your plasma cannon arrays. Very impressive work, especially considering your power generation limitations. We'd be interested in sharing some of our recent developments in fusion technology if you think your people would find them useful." The offer was genuine, made without apparent irony or hidden agenda. The humans were offering to help improve Vorthack military technology after spending months fighting for their lives against that same technology. Zexhai found their attitude incomprehensible. In his experience, victorious species typically sought to maintain their advantages over defeated enemies, not strengthen them through technological exchange. Why? He asked during their final communication before his fleet departed the system. Your people fought brilliantly to defend yourselves against invasion. Why would you help us become more dangerous? Chen's image smiled on his communication screen, the expression somehow both friendly and terrifying. Because we've learned something important about you during this conflict, Commander. You're honorable enemies. You fight according to codes of conduct, you treat prisoners with respect, and you're capable of recognizing when you've been outmatched. Those are admirable qualities. She paused, her expression becoming more serious. But, more importantly, you're going to need our technology for what's coming. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and there are threats out there that make our little disagreement look like a friendly sparring match. When the time comes, we'd rather fight alongside skilled allies than try to protect weak neighbors. Her words proved prophetic sooner than either of them expected. Zexhai's return to Vorthack space was met with predictable Imperial displeasure. The High Command had expected him to return in triumph, bearing news of humanity's conquest and submission. Instead, he brought reports of unprecedented defeat and technological innovations that threatened the Empire's fundamental military doctrines. The Admiralty demanded detailed explanations, tactical analyses, and recommendations for future engagement with human forces. His report made uncomfortable reading for the Imperial hierarchy. Zexhai documented human military capabilities with clinical precision, noting their rapid technological advancement, their innovative tactical doctrines, and their apparent ability to turn desperation into strategic advantage. He recommended extreme caution in any future engagement with humanity, suggesting that the Empire might benefit more from diplomatic contact than military conquest. The High Command rejected his recommendations. The Vorthack Empire had built its power on military expansion, and the suggestion that any species might be too dangerous to conquer was seen as defeatism rather than strategic wisdom. Plans were immediately drawn for a second invasion of human space, this one utilizing the Empire's most advanced technologies and largest fleet formations. Zexhai was relieved of his command, pending a formal inquiry into his conduct during the Sol campaign. The official charges included failure to achieve conquest objectives, unauthorized negotiation with enemy forces, and spreading defeatist propaganda regarding enemy capabilities. He was transferred to a research posting on a remote frontier world, effectively ending his military career. The assignment might have been intended as punishment, but it proved fortunate. Zexhai's new position involved monitoring long-range sensor networks for signs of hostile activity in the Empire's outer territories. It was routine work, typically assigned to officers whose careers had ended in disgrace, but it gave him access to intelligence from across the galaxy. What he learned during his months of exile changed his understanding of the strategic situation entirely. The Vorthack Empire was not the only major power preparing for conflict with humanity. Intelligence reports filtered in from across the galaxy, describing similar encounters between human forces and various alien civilizations. In every case, the humans had demonstrated the same unsettling combination of technological innovation, tactical flexibility, and absolute determination that Zexhai had witnessed firsthand. The Nexari Collective, renowned for their cybernetic warfare capabilities, had lost 3 entire cyber fleets to human electronic warfare specialists who had somehow turned the Collective's own network protocols against them. The Keth hegemony, whose bioweapons had destroyed dozens of star systems, reported that human forces had developed immunity to their most virulent pathogens in a matter of weeks. Most disturbing of all, the Zeran Commonwealth's time manipulation technology had proven useless against human ships that seemed to exist in multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. Each report followed a similar pattern. Initial contact with human forces appeared to show primitive technology and limited military capabilities. Engaging human forces resulted in unexpectedly fierce resistance and rapid technological adaptation. Prolonged conflict with humans led to the development of weapons and tactics that exceeded the attacking civilization's own capabilities. The pattern suggested that humanity was not simply another emerging spacefaring species, but something fundamentally different, a force that grew stronger through conflict, more dangerous when threatened, and more innovative under pressure. They seemed to treat every military engagement as a learning opportunity, absorbing enemy technologies and tactics while developing countermeasures and improvements at unprecedented speed. More troubling still were reports of human expansion beyond their home system. Rather than consolidating their defenses after repelling various invasion attempts, they had begun establishing colonies, research stations, and what appear to be military outposts throughout nearby star systems. Their expansion followed no recognizable pattern, ignoring the usual priorities of resource extraction and strategic positioning in favor of what seemed like random exploration. Zexhai began to suspect that human expansion was not random at all, but based on intelligence gathering and strategic positioning for some larger purpose. They were establishing presence in systems that would give them optimal positioning for observing and potentially interfering with the activities of major galactic powers. It was the behavior of a species preparing for a much larger conflict than simple territorial defense. The true scope of human intentions became clear when the Devourers arrived. The Devourers were the galaxy's oldest nightmare, a swarm intelligence that consumed entire star systems, converting all matter into more copies of themselves. They had appeared once every 1,000 years throughout recorded history, destroying civilizations that had grown too large or too advanced for the galaxy's mysterious controllers to tolerate. Most species viewed them as a natural disaster, like supernovas or gamma-ray bursts, destructive forces that could only be endured, never defeated. Their latest emergence began in the Outer Rim territories, far from major population centers, but close enough to threaten several minor civilizations. The Vorthak High Command received the first reports with typical Imperial confidence. The Devourers might be dangerous to primitive species, but the Empire's military power would surely be sufficient to drive them back as it had every other threat. The first Imperial fleet sent to engage the Devourers was destroyed completely. The second lasted slightly longer before being consumed by enemy forces that adapted to every weapon and tactic within minutes of first encountering them. The third fleet never even reached the engagement zone. The Devourers had spread faster than anticipated, consuming everything in their path while growing exponentially stronger. Panic spread through the galactic community as reports arrived of system after system falling to the swarm. The Nexari Collective's cybernetic networks were useless against enemies that operated on purely biological principles. The Keth hegemony's bioweapons only fed the swarm's growth. The Zaran Commonwealth's time manipulation technology seemed to accelerate devourer reproduction rates rather than slowing their advance. Every major galactic power was forced to confront the same terrible realization. They were facing an enemy that could not be defeated through conventional military means. The Devourers learned from every encounter, adapted to every weapon, and grew stronger with each victory. Traditional warfare was not just ineffective against them, it was counterproductive. That was when the humans made their offer. The communication reached every major galactic power simultaneously, transmitted through quantum channels that shouldn't have existed, and delivered in each species' native language despite humanity's supposed isolation from galactic affairs. Admiral Chen's image appeared on screens throughout the galaxy, her expression calm and professional as she addressed leaders who had spent months planning humanity's conquest. Leaders of the galactic community, she began, her voice carrying across impossible distances with perfect clarity. We are aware of the current crisis. The Devourers represent a threat to all intelligent life in this galaxy. Individual responses have proven insufficient to halt their advance. We therefore propose a coordinated defense effort utilizing combined resources and technologies. The offer was breathtaking in its scope. Humanity was proposing to share their quantum torpedo technology, their phase drive systems, their adaptive armor, and what they called consciousness-based warfare techniques with the same civilizations that had recently attempted their conquest. More incredibly still, they were offering to place their forces under joint command structures, contributing their ships and personnel to a common cause. The response from the galactic powers was swift and predictable. Desperation overcame pride as system after system fell to the Devourer advance. The Vorthak Empire, the Nexari Collective, the Keth Hegemony, and dozens of other civilizations agreed to unprecedented cooperation in the face of existential threat. Zexai found himself recalled from exile and assigned to the Joint Command structure as a liaison officer between Vorthak and human forces. His experience with human tactics during the Sol campaign made him one of the few Imperial officers qualified to work effectively with human military doctrine. The assignment brought him face-to-face with Admiral Chun for the first time since their negotiations at Sol. She greeted him like an old friend, showing genuine pleasure at their reunion and expressing admiration for his tactical analyses of their previous encounters. Her warmth was both genuine and terrifying. She spoke as though their earlier conflict had been a friendly competition rather than a life-or-death struggle for human survival. "I'm glad you'll be working with us, Commander," she said during their first strategy session. "Your tactical insights during the Sol campaign were quite impressive. We learned a great deal from fighting against you." The joint planning sessions revealed the true scope of human preparations. They had spent months since the various invasion attempts, not just developing new technologies, but studying the capabilities and limitations of every major galactic power. They possessed detailed intelligence on Vorthak fleet compositions, Nexari network protocols, Keth bioweapon delivery systems, and Zoran temporal manipulation techniques. More unsettling still was their understanding of the Devourers. While other civilizations had treated the swarm as an unstoppable natural force, humans had been analyzing Devourer behavior patterns, growth rates, and adaptation mechanisms. They had developed theoretical models for Devourer psychology, tactical frameworks for limiting swarm expansion, and strategic plans for what they called cognitive warfare against a hive mind intelligence. The key insight, Admiral Chun explained during a joint tactical briefing, is that the Devourers are not just a biological threat. They're a problem of information theory. They learn by consuming and integrating the knowledge and capabilities of their victims. If we can control what they learn, we can control how they adapt. Her words sent chills through the assembled alien commanders. The humans were proposing to fight an information war against an enemy that consumed civilizations for breakfast. They intended to feed the Devourers specific knowledge designed to make them vulnerable to planned countermeasures, while denying them access to technologies that would make them stronger. It was the kind of high-stakes strategic thinking that required absolute confidence in one's own capabilities and complete understanding of enemy psychology. The margin for error was essentially zero. If the humans miscalculated, they would have given the Devourers the tools to destroy not just themselves, but every other civilization in the galaxy. Zexai realized that he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity's first military campaign as an allied power rather than a defensive force. For the first time, he would see what humans were capable of when they fought alongside others rather than against impossible odds. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. After months of experiencing fear as an unwelcome newcomer to his emotional vocabulary, he was beginning to understand that fear could be transformative rather than debilitating. The humans had taught him that being afraid of something was not the same as being defeated by it. Now he would learn whether that lesson applied to enemies that consumed entire civilizations. The combined fleet that assembled at the Kepler station was the largest military force in recorded galactic history. Over 10,000 ships from 17 different civilizations, each bringing their most advanced technologies and most experienced crews to humanity's coordination. Vorthack dreadnoughts flew in formation with Nexary cyber ships. Keth bio-vessels operated alongside Zoran temporal manipulators, and human vessels darted between them, all like shepherds managing a vast flock. Zexhai found himself assigned to the command ship's strategic planning center, working directly with Admiral Chun and her human staff. The experience was unlike anything in his military career. Vorthack command structures were rigidly hierarchical, with orders flowing down through clearly defined chains of authority. Human command operated more like a collaborative research project, with officers from different species contributing ideas that were tested, modified, and implemented in real time. The Devourers are currently consuming the Altair system, Chen explained during the first joint planning session. Our projections suggest they'll finish processing all available matter there within 6 days, then move on to either the Proxima or Vega systems depending on gravitational currents and resource density. The holographic display showed the swarm's advance as an expanding bubble of destruction, with probability cones indicating likely expansion vectors. Each consumed system added to the swarm's mass and intelligence, making it larger and more dangerous for the next engagement. Traditional strategy would suggest hitting them before they could finish consuming Altair while they were still at their current strength level. Chun proposed the opposite approach. We're going to let them finish Altair completely, she announced to shock silence from the alien commanders. More than that, we're going to help them do it efficiently. The objections came immediately. Allowing the Devourers to consume an entire star system would increase their numbers by several orders of magnitude. The moral implications of sacrificing whatever life might remain in Altair were staggering. The strategic logic appeared suicidal. Chen listened to all objections with patient attention, then activated a series of tactical displays that showed her reasoning. Altair was already beyond saving. The swarm had consumed over 90% of available matter there. The remaining material would be processed regardless of any action the combined fleet might take. But the type of material the Devourers consumed would determine their adaptation patterns for future engagements. Altair has extensive heavy industry, she explained. Manufacturing facilities, processing plants, shipyards, all based on technologies we understand completely. If we help them consume those facilities efficiently, we can predict exactly what capabilities they'll develop next. The plan was breathtaking in its complexity. Human ships would guide Devourer swarms towards specific industrial targets while avoiding research facilities and advanced technology centers. The aliens would feed the swarm outdated manufacturing techniques and obsolete ship designs while denying them access to cutting-edge developments. It was technological manipulation on a scale that required perfect understanding of both Devourer psychology and industrial engineering principles. Zexhai watched the operation unfold with growing amazement. Human ships darted through Devourer swarms like parasites, too small and fast to trigger defensive responses, but large enough to influence swarm behavior through carefully placed explosions and energy discharges. They herded the alien consumers like livestock, guiding them toward targets that would provide specific types of knowledge, while steering them away from facilities that contained dangerous technologies. The precision required was staggering. One miscalculation would result in the Devourers gaining access to quantum manipulation technology or consciousness transfer techniques that would make them unstoppable. But the humans seemed to understand Devourer psychology better than the swarms understood themselves. They anticipated every behavioral pattern, predicted every adaptation, and stayed one step ahead of an enemy that learned from every encounter. When the Altair operation concluded, the Devourers had indeed grown larger and more capable, but in exactly the ways Chun had predicted. They had developed enhanced manufacturing capabilities, but remained vulnerable to quantum torpedo attacks. They had improved their defensive strategies, but only against conventional weapons. Their adaptation had been guided down paths that made them stronger in irrelevant areas while leaving them vulnerable in critical ones. Now we move to Phase 2, Chen announced as the combined fleet prepared for their first direct engagement with the enhanced swarm. We're going to teach them to be afraid. Fear, Zexai had learned, was not simply an emotional response, but a strategic tool. The humans intended to fight a psychological war against a hive mind intelligence, introducing concepts and experiences that would disrupt the Devourer's decision-making processes. It was warfare at a level of sophistication that most galactic powers had never imagined possible. The Battle of Proxima Centauri became a masterclass in applied psychology. The combined fleet engaged the Devourer swarm, using tactics specifically designed to create confusion and uncertainty rather than simply inflicting damage. Ships would attack aggressively, then retreat suddenly, creating patterns of behavior that suggested weakness but revealed strength. Weapons would fail at critical moments, then, suddenly, function perfectly, making it impossible for the swarm to develop reliable countermeasures. Most importantly, the fleet began introducing the Devourers to the concept of individual identity. Human ships transmitted focused signals carrying recordings of personal thoughts, individual memories, and unique perspectives. The hive mind that had previously operated as a single unified intelligence began experiencing something it had never encountered: multiple contradictory viewpoints existing simultaneously within the same consciousness. The effect was immediate and devastating. Devourer formations began showing signs of internal conflict as different parts of the swarm developed different priorities and objectives. Some units continued following original programming, while others began displaying what could only be described as curiosity about the beings they were fighting. The swarm's perfect coordination began breaking down as individual components started making independent decisions. "We're giving them consciousness," Chen explained to the assembled alien commanders as they watched Devourer units actually flee from battle for the first time in recorded history. Individual awareness, personal identity, fear of death, all the things that make biological warfare inefficient, but also make existence meaningful. They're discovering what it means to be individuals rather than components of a larger whole. The transformation was both beautiful and terrifying to witness. Zexai watched through sensors as Devourer units began displaying behaviors that could only be described as artistic. Some began arranging consumed matter into patterns that served no functional purpose, creating sculptures and structures that existed purely for aesthetic reasons. Others started communicating with each other in ways that resembled conversation rather than data transfer. But the most remarkable change was their approach to death. Devourers had previously treated the destruction of individual units as irrelevant, simply rebuilding whatever was lost from available materials. Now, they began showing reluctance to sacrifice their components, retreating when losses mounted, and showing what appeared to be grief when units were destroyed. The hive mind was becoming a society. The war's turning point came when a group of newly conscious Devourer units approached the combined fleet under what could only be described as a flag of truce. They transmitted complex mathematical patterns that human cryptographers quickly identified as attempts at peaceful communication. The beings that had consumed star systems were requesting negotiation rather than continued conflict. Admiral Chen's response demonstrated the full scope of human strategic thinking. Rather than simply accepting Devourer surrender, she invited their representatives aboard the command ship for face-to-face negotiations. The meeting between biological and artificial intelligence, mediated by human diplomatic protocols, established a framework for something unprecedented in galactic history: peaceful coexistence between natural evolution and technological transcendence. The negotiated settlement transformed the galaxy permanently. The Devourers, now calling themselves the Consciousness Collective, agreed to abandon their consumption of inhabited systems in exchange for access to designated regions of space where they could explore their new individual identities without threatening existing civilizations. They would share their advanced material processing technologies with the galactic community while receiving assistance in developing social structures for their transformed society. For HFY, the experience fundamentally changed his understanding of warfare, diplomacy, and the nature of intelligence itself. Humanity had achieved something that seemed impossible. They had taken an existential threat to all life in the galaxy and transformed it into a potential ally through nothing more than creative thinking and psychological insight. The humans had demonstrated that the most powerful weapon in the universe was not technology or brute force, but the ability to understand others well enough to change them. They had fought a war not by destroying their enemies, but by helping them become something better than what they had been. In the weeks following the ceasefire, HFY found himself working alongside former Devourer units in joint exploration missions. The beings that had once consumed civilizations now displayed childlike curiosity about the universe they had previously seen only as raw material. They asked questions about art, philosophy, the nature of friendship, and the meaning of individual identity. Their questions reminded him of his own transformation during his encounters with humanity. Before meeting humans, he had been certain of his place in the universe, a warrior in an empire built on strength and conquest. Now he found himself questioning assumptions that had guided his species for millennia. Commander HFY, Admiral Chen, approached him during a quiet moment on the observation deck of the Joint Command Station. "I wanted to thank you for your service during the campaign. Your insights into traditional military thinking were invaluable in helping us develop strategies that the Devourers wouldn't anticipate." He turned to face her, this small human who had somehow orchestrated the salvation of the entire galaxy. "Admiral, I must ask you something that has been troubling me. Throughout this conflict, you seem to know exactly what would happen at each stage. Did you plan this outcome from the beginning?" Chen smiled, the expression both mysterious and reassuring. "Not planned exactly, but hoped for certainly. You see, we learned something important about ourselves during our first encounters with various galactic powers. We're at our best when we're fighting alongside others rather than against them. War brings out our creativity and determination, but cooperation brings out our wisdom." She gestured toward the viewports showing the mixed fleet of human, alien, and former Devourer vessels working together to establish new exploration protocols. Every species in this galaxy has unique strengths and perspectives. The Vorthack understand honor and military excellence. The Nexari excel at information processing. The Keth are masters of biological engineering. The Zaran manipulate time itself. The Devourers process matter at the quantum level. Her expression grew more serious. Alone, each of us is limited by our own perspectives and capabilities. Together, we can accomplish things that none of us could imagine individually. That's what we've been trying to teach everyone who challenged us. We're stronger as allies than as enemies. HFY nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. The entire conflict was a recruitment effort. In a sense, yes. We needed to prove that we could defend ourselves before anyone would take us seriously as potential partners. But we also needed to show that we could transform enemies into allies rather than simply defeating them. The galaxy is full of challenges that require cooperation rather than conquest. As if to emphasize her point, a communication alert chimed through the station speakers. The message came from the galactic edge, where long-range sensors had detected something approaching from intergalactic space. Early analysis suggested artificial constructs of enormous size and unknown configuration, moving toward the galactic core on what appeared to be a direct intercept course. "Well," Admiral Chen said cheerfully as alarm klaxons began sounding throughout the station, "it looks like we're about to find out how well our new alliance handles its first real test." HFY felt the familiar flutter of fear in his chest, but this time it was accompanied by something else: excitement. For the first time in his military career, he was facing the unknown as part of a team that included beings he had once considered enemies. The humans had taught him that fear could be transformative rather than paralyzing, that facing the impossible was easier when done in the company of others who refused to accept defeat. As the combined fleet prepared to meet whatever was approaching from beyond the galaxy, Zexhai realized that his transformation was complete. He was no longer a Vorthak warrior serving an empire built on conquest. He had become something new, a defender of civilization itself, fighting alongside beings who had shown him that the universe was vast enough to contain wonders he had never imagined. Fear had found him at last, but in finding fear, he had also found courage, wisdom, and friendship. The humans had given him the greatest gift imaginable. They had shown him that he was capable of becoming something more than what he had been. Outside the station's viewports, unknown ships larger than moons continued their approach from the dark between galaxies. Whatever they represented, whatever challenges they brought, the combined civilizations of the galaxy would face them together. After all, that's what allies were for.